what do you do when the whole world is saying one thing and you know deep inside that it's wrong? We have 12 leaders, respected, wise, chosen by name, sent to spy out the promised land. 10 of them return with dread. We saw giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And so we were in theirs. But two of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, see the same land and come back with courage. They said, the land is very, very good. If Hashem desires, he will bring us there. The first verse is in chapter 13 in Numbers, verse 33. The second is from Numbers chapter 14, verses 7 through 8. You have the same facts, same terrain, completely different spirit. And here's the key for Noahites. Caleb and Joshua stood alone. They were the minority voice of truth. In an age of fear, they were vessels of faith. Why is it so hard to take a different stance? Why is it so hard to say something different than what everybody else is saying? Because the world is not neutral. It's built with feedback loops. Today, online and offline, we are constantly evaluated, rated, judged. Social media rewards conformity. Viral trends, algorithmic amplification, like buttons. It punishes dissent. You see the pylons or cancel culture or quiet shadow banning of individuals. And of course, the dopamine hit of approval wires us to self-censor. And that's why it often feels safer to say things like, I'm spiritual, but not religious. That phrase is a shield against ridicule, especially in societies that mock organized religion as controlling or backward. But it also avoids commitment. Rav Hirsch comments on Numbers chapter 14, verse 24. He says, in every generation, the cause of truth has rested on the shoulders of a faithful few. What made them stand apart was not defiance, but fidelity. In other words, the greatness of Caleb, Joshua, was not merely that they opposed the others, but that they stood firm with clarity and conviction, not anger. Their spirit were not reactive. They were rooted. It's not just about being brave. It's about being honest with God. And that's a quality that's rare. Now, who else? Who else do we know that stood like Caleb, like Joshua? Abraham was called Avraham Ha'ivri. Ha'ivri, that's where we get the word Hebrew from. Ha'ivri means the one who stood on the other side, alone, against a world of idolatry. Everybody else was a polytheist in his time. He was the one dissenter. Also, of course, we have Noah, who built an ark for 120 years in the face of mockery from his generation. Prophets, Jeremiah, for example, who wept alone for truths that no one else wanted to hear. Today's Noahide does the same. They leave behind belief systems they were raised in. Sometimes they lose friends, face questions, and sometimes rejection. And they quietly align their lives with divine truth, with the Torah's truth. The Baal Shem Tov in Tzavat HaRivash is reported to have said, a soul comes down into this world for 70 or 80 years just to do one favor for another, either physically or spiritually. He also said something very powerful. Even if the whole world says the opposite, if you know that what you have is truth from God, you are the majority. It's not being a contrarian. It's having clarity. Why did the spies fall? They brought back an evil report of the land. What's the problem? Were they embellishing anything? They were just really reporting what they saw. But it wasn't slander. It wasn't just slander. It was emotional sabotage. They said things like, we're not able to do this. This is a land that devours its inhabitants. We looked at the population there and we were like grasshoppers in their eyes. Chavetz Chaim explains Lashon Hara, which is evil speech, has this interesting effect. It dims the light of the soul. It plants despair. It can erode bitachon, which means trust in God. There's a very interesting quote also from Rav Mendel of Kotz, the Kotzker Rebbe. He said that this first sentence, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were like grasshoppers in their eyes. You notice that the whole idea begins with a certain self-appraisal. If you don't have belief in yourself, if you look at yourself as small, it tends to broadcast that to other people. But it doesn't start with, well, they were looking at us and they looked at us as small. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. The lesson is, don't be a grasshopper. When we speak negatively, just to go back to this idea that the Chavetz Chaim brought, even to be realistic, we speak negatively. We train the mind to expect failure. As we can see from every media outlet that exists today, speech doesn't just describe reality, it shapes reality. If you constantly post or share what's broken in the world, you'll feel broken. If you share what's meaningful, your life will begin to feel meaningful. That's why the Torah is so careful about speech. And why, when we talk about prayer, Mishama Farim Svatenu, that we will offer the fruit, the bulls of our lips, our prayers, words, our praises of God. These are all called sacrifices today. In the absence of a Beit HaMikdash, in the absence of the temple, where we used to bring sacrifices, and one day we will again, today we have prayer. Today we have the bulls, the offerings of our lips. And those are akin to sacrifices. Words have unbelievable power. They have the power to build or destroy. And when we look for modern examples of that kind of courage displayed by Caleb and Joshua. We have some true examples. Happened to find these on a bunch of different outreach platforms and personal testimonies. A fellow by the name of George from the Philippines now teaches Torah online to dozens of people across Asia. He's calm, he's warm, he's deeply grounded. He was a seminary student who walked away from his career to follow Hashem, to follow Torah. There's a woman named Ruth from Oklahoma who started a Noahide support network for prisoners. She's never even met another Noahide in person. There's a fellow by the name of Yusef from Turkey who writes stories based on Torah ideas, but are disguised as cultural commentary. And his posts get quietly circulated through academic networks. Whereas I've seen some other things out there. There's a certain wellness influencer who tried mixing Torah with tarot card reading. And she managed to gain a lot of followers, but eventually the whole thing lost coherence. Eventually the platform collapsed because of the inconsistency. And it's been brought up by educators in this Noahide space as a cautionary tale. In other words, it has to be real, it has to be true, it has to be consistent. But it has to be said. The Parsha, Shelach, ends with a mitzvah that does not apply to Noahides, which is the mitzvah of tzitzit, the obligation to place specific fringes on the corners of one's garment. What we have with tzitzit are ways of tying them that numerologically comes out to the number 613 to remind us of the 13 commandments. And the verse says about tzitzit, it's in Numbers chapter 15, verse 39. And you will look at them and remember and not follow your heart or eyes, meaning not be seduced by your heart or eyes. One principle I always like to emphasize is that the Torah has elements of law and elements of morality in the narrative, so that even when the law itself does not apply to Noahides, the underlying moral idea may still be universal and something that's food for inspiration. The tzitzit are created in such a way as to trigger memory. Memory structures our identity. Rituals anchor meaning. Noahides understandably yearn for this, which is why some people will ask to participate in Jewish-specific rituals. But the deeper yearning, we know, is for sacred rhythm, for structure. So what can you do? What can you do to have this element of remembrance? You can fix a daily moment to connect to Hashem, speak to God in your own language, like a good friend. Choose symbols, artwork that reflects your commitment. Learn Torah not just to know, but to remember who you are. In the Parsha, in this Torah portion, we see that the Israelites unfortunately failed to remember. But Joshua and Caleb remembered who they were and whose they were. Takeaway: the spies saw danger. Joshua and Caleb saw destiny. One saw grasshoppers. The other saw Hashem's partnership. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, wrote, "Fear is the loneliness of faithlessness." But Noahites today are not alone. You stand in the spirit of Abraham, of Noah, of Caleb, of Joshua. You're walking up to a truth in a world of noise. You're choosing to serve rather than be swept along. And as we see in the verse, chapter 14, verse 24, Hashem says, my servant Caleb had a different spirit, and I'll bring him to the land. May each of us be granted that spirit, that memory, that courage, and that reward.